The invisible secretary and the Millionaire's world Roman, Castellano, had always been a man people noticed the moment he entered a room. His presence filled every space as naturally as light flooding through tall windows, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. Whether in the glass towers of Manhattan's financial district or in the glittering ballrooms of the city's elite, at only 32, he had already built Castellano Industries into one of the most respected conglomerates in the country. With holdings in finance, technology, and global real estate, the newspapers wrote about him with awe. The gossip columns speculated endlessly about his personal life, and every move he made seemed to confirm his image as a man untouchable, a man born to rule. His broad shoulders and perfect suits were only part of the picture. What truly made him formidable was his mind, sharp, disciplined, and relentless in its pursuit of success. Yet for all the attention he commanded, for all the admiration and envy he inspired, there were things he never truly saw, things hidden in plain sight, and perhaps none more remarkable than the quiet figure who entered his office every morning. With his first coffee of the day, Celeste Morgan had worked as his personal secretary for 3 years. A stretch of time that seemed longer than it really was because of the monotony and invisibility that defined her life. At 26, she was intelligent, competent, and dedicated, yet she had learned to fade into the background, to present herself in such a way that no one would linger on her presence for too long. She wore oversized cardigans that swallowed her frame, kept her dark hair bound tightly in a bun at the nape of her neck, and chose plain glasses that dulled the brightness of her eyes. To the rest of the office, she was Ms. Morgan, the efficient assistant, and to Roman, she was simply Celeste, a reliable fixture in his daily schedule. As unremarkable to him as the clock on the wall or the desk beneath his hands, but behind that careful mask, Celeste carried an inner world no one knew. She had grown up learning that attention could be cruel, that beauty if noticed could draw envy or ridicule, and so she had trained herself to disappear, to retreat into invisibility. Yet she was far from weak. Every day she managed Roman's empire from behind the scenes, anticipating his needs before he even spoke them, organizing the endless flood of meetings and negotiations, ensuring his life moved seamlessly like a well-tuned machine. Her intelligence was sharp, her instincts remarkable, and her loyalty unquestionable, though she never sought credit. Instead, she allowed him to believe it was his control that kept everything in order, while she quietly ensured no detail ever slipped through the cracks. That morning began like so many others. With the elevator climbing steadily to the 52nd floor, its mirrored walls reflecting Celeste's small, plain figure as she clutched her leather portfolio to her chest. She wore a simple gray cardigan that hung loose, a faded pencil skirt, and shoes that had long since lost their shine. She saw herself in the reflection and sighed quietly, reminding herself that it was better this way, better to go unnoticed, better not to attract the mocking eyes of the stylish assistants who worked for other executives in the building. The moment the doors slid open, she stepped out with quiet efficiency, her mind already racing through the tasks of the day. She knew Roman's preferences by heart, how he wanted his espresso prepared, what files would matter most to him before noon, which calls he preferred to avoid, and which deals required his immediate attention. She had already rearranged 2 meetings before even arriving, predicting that he would want more time to analyze the Morrison acquisition before meeting with the board. Roman stood at the far side of his corner office, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the jagged skyline of New York. The rising sun painted the glass towers in shades of gold and fire, but he barely noticed. His mind was fixed on numbers, reports, strategies. He carried himself like a man who had no time for distractions. His steel-gray eyes narrowed in thought as he adjusted the cuff of his immaculate suit. When Celeste entered softly, placing his coffee and schedule neatly on his desk, his eyes flickered toward her for barely a moment before turning back to the city. "Cancel the 3 o'clock with Peterson," he said, his voice smooth, clipped, and precise. "Move the board meeting to tomorrow. I want more time with the Morrison files. It's already done," Sir Celeste replied quietly, not daring to meet his eyes. "I anticipated you might prefer that." He paused for the briefest moment. a flicker of acknowledgement passing across his face, though no words followed. Roman was not a man who gave compliments freely. To him, competence was expected, not rewarded. He nodded slightly, then asked, "Anything else?" Celeste hesitated, her hands tightening on the portfolio she carried. "Yes, sir. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala is tomorrow night. Ms. Winters is called this morning. She won't be able to attend due to a family emergency. Would you like me to arrange for another escort?" Roman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He despised such social events, yet he knew their value. The gala was one of the year's most significant gatherings, where investors, senators, and philanthropists all mingled, where alliances were forged over champagne flutes and whispered conversations. Arriving alone would spark unnecessary gossip, a risk he could not afford. He turned from the window and finally faced her fully, his gaze steady, unreadable. "No need," he said firmly. "You'll accompany me." Celeste blinked, the words striking her like a physical blow. She nearly dropped the portfolio, her throat tightening. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't think I heard correctly." "You heard perfectly," Roman replied, his tone final. "You know my schedule, you understand my associates, and you're capable of handling conversations that may arise. It makes perfect sense." Her lips parted as if to protest, but the steel in his eyes silenced her. "Sir, I don't have anything suitable for such an event. The gala attracts the city's elite." "I then buy what you need," he interrupted briskly. "Take the corporate card. Consider it a work expense, for the first time in years." He actually looked at her, though even then his gaze was more practical than personal. "I need someone competent at my side. It's not another shallow socialite whose only concern is being photographed." Celeste lowered her eyes, her heart pounding. She wanted to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of invisibility, but the decision had already been made. Roman had spoken, and when Roman Castellano decided something, the matter was settled. She nodded quietly, murmuring, "Yes, sir," before excusing herself from the office. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing outside Bergdorf Goodman. Her fingers clutched tightly around the smooth edge of the corporate card. The luxurious storefront gleamed like a palace of glass and light, filled with gowns and accessories far beyond anything she had ever dared to imagine owning. She had never spent more than $50 on a single piece of clothing in her life. Yet now she was expected to prepare herself for one of the most exclusive galas in New York. The thought terrified her, but there was no turning back. She stepped inside, her breath catching as chandeliers sparkled overhead and mannequins displayed gowns worth more than her annual. Salar YA sales associate approached, perfectly groomed and wearing an expression that flickered with surprise at Celeste's plain appearance. "May I help you?" she asked politely, though her tone carried the faintest edge of judgment. I need something for the Children's Hospital Charity Gala tomorrow night," Celeste said softly, her voice uncertain. The associate's demeanor shifted immediately, her eyes widening. "Of course. The Charity Gala is one of the most important events of the season. Let's find you something absolutely perfect." What followed was unlike anything Celeste had ever experienced. Hours passed in a blur of silk and sequins, of mirrors and fittings, of makeup brushes and whispered advice. A stunning midnight blue gown was chosen, one that hugged her curves with quiet elegance, the silk shimmering subtly under the store's golden lights. Accessories were selected with care, delicate jewelry that caught the eye without overpowering, and shoes that elevated her frame with a grace she had never felt before. The sales associate guided her gently, her earlier judgment replaced with genuine enthusiasm as the transformation unfolded. When Celeste finally stood before the mirror, wearing the gown and heels, her breath caught in her throat. For the first time in years, she didn't see the invisible secretary, the overlooked assistant hidden behind cardigans and glasses. She saw a woman with quiet strength, a woman whose beauty was not forced or artificial, but natural, radiant, undeniable. As she left the store that evening, carrying the carefully packaged gown, her heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Tomorrow night would change everything. She did not know how, and she was not ready to believe that a man like Roman could ever truly see her. But for the first time, She allowed herself to imagine the possibility of stepping out of the shadows. Asterisk the day of doubt and the hidden goddess. The night after her unexpected assignment had been restless for Celeste, though her mind refused to surrender to the comfort of sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. The gown and its careful packaging hanging on the back of her bedroom door, like a haunting reminder of the impossible task that awaited her. Every thought spiraled into doubt. What if she embarrassed herself? What if she failed to meet Roman standards? What if the wealthy elite at the gala laughed at her presence the moment she stepped into that golden-lit ballroom? Her stomach tightened at the thought of being surrounded by senators, philanthropists, and glamorous women who had never known the kind of invisibility she had lived with all her life. She had spent years blending into the background, and now with only a single night's notice, she was expected to emerge into the spotlight. It felt like being asked to cross a chasm with no bridge, but beneath the nerves and fear was something else. Something Celeste had long buried, a flicker of curiosity, a quiet flame of longing that whispered, maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to step outside the shadow of her own making. She had hidden her beauty, her confidence, her presence, because invisibility was safe. But safety had also been suffocating. Roman had chosen her not for her looks or her charm, but for her competence, for her intelligence, and that thought alone gave her a strange kind of courage. If she could manage his empire from the background, perhaps she could manage a single evening in the foreground. The next morning, she woke with the decision trembling on her lips. For the first time in 3 years, she called in sick. The secretary, who had never missed a single day, never faltered, never stumbled, allowed herself this one exception. When she hung up the phone, her hands were shaking, but deep inside, a strange exhilaration began to build. She had a mission now, not for the company, not even for Roman, but for herself. Miranda, the sales associate from the evening before, had scribbled down the name of a luxury salon she swore by. Celeste found herself there before noon, clutching the card like a lifeline. The salon was nothing like the simple corner shops she had occasionally visited for a quick trim. This was a temple of transformation. The scent of expensive oils hung in the air, and soft music drifted over the polished marble floors. A team of stylists greeted her with warmth, their eyes alight with possibility as Miranda's referral was mentioned. She surrendered herself into their hands, nerves prickling at every step. They began by loosening the dark bun she had worn for years, and her hair spilled down her shoulders in waves she had long forgotten she possessed. Hours passed as they worked, cutting, styling, coloring with the gentlest of touches. Her hair was shaped into soft waves that framed her face, catching the light in a way that seemed almost magical. Her glasses were set aside, replaced with contact lenses that revealed eyes of vivid emerald green, so clear and striking that even the stylists gasped softly at the revelation. Then came the makeup. Not heavy or artificial, but delicate, enhancing rather than masking. A touch of color to her lips, a sweep of shadow across her lids, a hint of blush that brought life to her cheeks. With every stroke, Celeste felt layers of invisibility peeling away, until she no longer recognized the reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was radiant, elegant, beautiful in a way that was not merely external, but drawn from the confidence sparking within. For years, she had convinced herself that beauty was dangerous, that being noticed was a burden. Yet now she realized how much she had denied herself. She did not need to become someone else. She only needed to reveal the self she had always kept hidden. When she finally rose from the chair, the stylists applauded softly, and Celeste smiled a real smile, unguarded and genuine. She clutched the gown's bag tighter, her heart racing as she stepped out of the salon into the fading light of evening. The city seemed different, as though it had shifted slightly to acknowledge her presence. She walked with a new kind of posture, taller, steadier. Though her heart was still filled with doubt, at home she hung the gown carefully, her fingers brushing the smooth silk. She traced the neckline with a trembling hand, imagining how it would feel to step into the ballroom at Roman's side. The thought of him seeing her like this made her chest tighten in ways she did not understand. For years she had accepted his cold indifference, telling herself it did not matter. But now she wondered what it would mean to finally be seen by him, not as an efficient assistant, not as a background figure, but as a woman. The night stretched on, filled with restless anticipation. She rehearsed conversations in her head, practiced her smile, tried to steady her nerves. Every so often she caught her reflection and startled herself with the transformation. Was this really her? Was this the same woman who had been invisible in gray cardigans and tired shoes? And beneath all the fear, a quiet realization began to settle. This was no longer about Roman. It's no longer about the gala or the elite crowd she would face. This was about herself, about proving that she could stand in the light without shrinking back into the shadows. Tomorrow night would not simply be a social event. It would be the unveiling of a truth she had hidden for too long as the clock ticked toward midnight. Celeste lay in bed once more, but this time her eyes did not stare at the ceiling in dread. Instead, she closed them with a whisper of hope, clutching the thought that perhaps the world and Roman Castellano himself was about to see her for the very first time. Asterisk the gala and the revelation. Evening of the gala arrived draped in a kind of electric anticipation that Celeste had never felt before. The streets of Manhattan shimmered with lights as black cars lined up outside the Plaza Hotel, their polished frames reflecting the golden glow of chandeliers spilling from the entrance. Photographers clustered near the steps, flashes already sparking like small bursts of lightning as New York's wealthiest and most powerful arrived in carefully curated elegance. Inside, the grand ballroom glittered with crystal, the air thick with music, laughter, and the subtle weight of unspoken deals waiting to be struck. For most people, this was a stage 4 status. But for Celeste, it was a test of courage unlike any she had ever faced. She stood in her modest apartment before the mirror, slipping into the midnight blue gown with trembling hands. The silk clung to her frame in ways that made her heart race, hugging curves she had spent years hiding. When she adjusted the delicate straps and turned slightly, she caught her reflection from the corner of her eye and nearly gasped at the sight. It was not vanity that stunned her. It was the simple disbelief that she could look like this. That beneath all those years of gray sweaters and tight buns had lived this woman, elegant and radiant. Her emerald eyes, freed from the burden of glasses, glimmered with a spark that even she could not deny. By the time she slipped on the heels, clasped the delicate silver necklace around her throat, and gathered her small clutch, her transformation was complete. Yet she lingered at the mirror, uncertain, her hands pressed to her chest as if to steady the storm inside. She thought of Roman waiting at the hotel, of his cool indifference, of the way he had summoned her presence at the gala with the same matter of fact authority he used to cancel meetings. Would he even notice? Or would she remain invisible, even wrapped in silk and light? The drive to the plaza passed in a blur, the city lights streaking across the windows as if time itself had decided to carry her swiftly toward destiny. When the car pulled up before the entrance, her pulse hammered in her ears. She drew a long, steadying breath before stepping out, the cool evening air wrapping around her bare shoulders. For one fragile moment, she nearly faltered. But then she lifted her chin, straightened her spine, and walked inside. Roman stood in the marble lobby near the grand staircase, his watch glinting under the chandeliers as he checked the time. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, every inch of him exuding the control and presence that had made him the most formidable young businessman in the city. His sharp eyes scanned the crowd, irritation flickering briefly that his assistant, punctual to a fault, was late. A senator had already approached him, and though Roman held his composure, he felt the absence of someone who could ease such conversations with quiet competence. Then a voice touched his ear, soft yet familiar. "Mr. Castellano?" He turned, expecting the plain, unremarkable presence of Celeste Morgan, but when his gaze fell upon the woman standing before him, he froze as though the world itself had forgotten to move. She was breathtaking. The midnight blue gown flowed around her like liquid starlight, the silk catching every angle of light as she moved. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, framing a face that seemed almost too radiant for him to believe. And her eyes, those emerald eyes, glittered with intelligence and depth he had somehow overlooked all these years. Asterisk. Roman's voice faltered in a way it never had before. Do we know each other? Celeste's lips curved into the faintest smile, her heart pounding as she whispered, "It's me. It's to Castellano, Celeste." The name hung in the air between them, fragile and unbelievable. Roman blinked, his mind reeling. Celeste, his quiet, invisible secretary, the woman who blended into gray walls and worn cardigans, was standing before him, transformed into something ethereal. His tongue traced her name again, softer this time, as though tasting it for the first time. "Celeste." She lowered her eyes modestly, though a faint blush warmed her cheeks. "I hope this isn't a problem, sir." A strange tightness coiled in Roman's chest, a sensation foreign to him. He had faced hostile boardrooms, ruthless competitors, and storms of speculation without blinking, yet here, in the presence of the woman he thought he had known, he found himself breathless. It was not just the beauty of her form, it was the revelation of her essence, the quiet strength she carried with such grace. He extended his arm almost instinctively, his voice rougher than usual. "Shall we?" Together they ascended the marble staircase and entered the ballroom, and as they did, every head seemed to turn. Men stared openly, women whispered behind jeweled fans, and the atmosphere shifted, charged with curiosity. Roman had never cared for gossip, yet tonight he felt something fierce stir within him as eyes lingered too long on Celeste. For the first time, he felt a possessive protectiveness he could not explain, as though she were more than a companion for the evening, as though she were a part of him that had only just been revealed. They moved through the crowd with seamless poise, Roman introducing her to senators, investors, and philanthropists. "This is Celeste Morgan," he said, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Each time he spoke her name, it was with a pride that startled even him. Celeste, in turn, astonished him further. She spoke with warmth and intelligence, conversing about the hospital's new pediatric wing, engaging the senator's wife with insight and grace, easing complex topics into natural flow. Roman watched, captivated, as the woman he had dismissed for years revealed a brilliance that outshone even the chandeliers above them. When the orchestra began to play, Roman did something he rarely did, something impulsive. He turned to her and offered his hand. "Would you care to dance?" For a heartbeat, Celeste hesitated, her nerves threatening to undo her newfound confidence. But then she placed her hand in his, and he led her to the polished floor where couples glided beneath the golden lights. As the music swelled, Roman drew her closer, his hand firm at her waist, his breath brushing against her ear. "You're full of surprises tonight," he murmured, his tone lower, softer than she had ever heard it. Celeste met his gaze, her emerald eyes shimmering. "I'm the same person I've always been," she replied gently. "Maybe you just never looked closely." His chest tightened, the words striking with unexpected force. He had prided himself on seeing everything, on noticing details others missed. Yet somehow he had failed to see her. And now, as she moved in his arms, graceful and radiant, he wondered how many other truths had gone unnoticed because he had been too focused on power and control. The music wrapped around them, but Roman barely heard it. He saw only her. The rest of the ballroom faded into a blur of light and shadow, as though the world had conspired to remind him that even the most powerful man could be humbled not by competition, not by loss, but by the sudden revelation of a woman he thought he knew. Asterisk, the awakening of hearts. The dance ended. Yet neither Roman nor Celeste stepped away immediately. For a fleeting moment, they stood there as if time had been suspended around them. Her emerald eyes locked with his steel-gray gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, a current of awareness, fragile yet undeniable. When at last the music faded and another couple brushed past, Roman cleared his throat, as though trying to shake free from an invisible spell. But the feeling did not release him. Instead, it lingered, clinging to him with a quiet persistence, awakening thoughts and emotions he had long ignored. As the evening unfolded, Roman found himself watching Celeste in ways he never had before. Every smile she offered, every word she spoke, carried a grace that unsettled him. She had always been competent, reliable, essential to the seamless running of his empire. But tonight he saw beyond her efficiency. He saw the intelligence that lit her eyes as she debated policy with a senator's aide, the kindness in her voice as she spoke with a philanthropist's elderly wife, the elegance in her movements that drew admiration from across the room. She was no longer invisible. She was radiant. The realization struck him harder than any business victory ever had. Yet with that realization came an unfamiliar unease. Roman Castellano prided himself on control. His empire was built on predictability, on anticipating moves before they happened, on keeping his emotions in check so that no competitor could exploit weakness. But standing beside Celeste, hearing her laugh softly at a remark, watching her head tilt gracefully as she listened with genuine interest, Roman felt cracks forming in the armor he had worn for so long. For the first time in years, he was not in command of his own thoughts. Celeste, too, was caught in a storm of emotion she had not prepared for. At first she had believed the evening would be an ordeal, something to survive rather than enjoy. Yet as the hours passed, she discovered herself moving with ease through the glittering world of power and wealth. Confidence she never knew she possessed seemed to flow naturally, her conversations weaving seamlessly into the rhythm of the night. And each time she felt Roman's hand at her back or caught his eyes lingering on her, her heart stirred in ways that frightened and thrilled her all at once. There were moments when she caught whispers from the crowd, the subtle tilt of a head, the murmur of envy in another woman's voice, the speculative curiosity of men who glanced too long in her direction. Once, a well-known venture capitalist leaned in too close, hello, his words dripping with charm as he asked if she was available for lunch. Roman's jaw tightened at the sight, and without hesitation, he stepped forward, sliding his hand firmly around her waist, his voice cold but controlled as he introduced her again with emphasis. Celeste Morgan, my companion for the evening. The look he gave the man left no room for interpretation. And as the investor retreated with an awkward laugh, Celeste felt her pulse race at the unexpected protectiveness in Roman's gesture. Asterisk later, as the night drew on and the music softened into slower rhythms, Roman guided her away from the crowd toward one of the balconies overlooking the glittering skyline. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city below, and for a moment the noise of the gala fell away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet glow of the stars. Celeste rested her hands on the marble railing, drawing in the night air to steady herself, while Roman studied her in silence, his eyes tracing the lines of her face as if committing them to memory. "You've surprised me tonight," he said at last, his voice quieter, more reflective than she had ever heard it. Celeste turned to him, her lips curving with a gentle smile. "I told you, I'm the same person I've always been. Perhaps you just never noticed." Her words cut deeper than she intended, yet they rang with undeniable truth. Roman exhaled slowly, turning his gaze toward the city lights. "You're right. I didn't, and I can't decide whether that makes me a fool or simply blind." Asterisk Celeste looked at him, really looked at him not as her untouchable employer, but as a man who, for once, seemed vulnerable. His broad shoulders still carried the weight of authority, yet his eyes held something softer, something uncertain. For the first time, she sensed not just power in him, but loneliness. The kind that came from living too long behind walls of control. And in that moment her heart ached, not from fear or doubt, but from recognition. She had been invisible because she chose to hide. He had been blind because he chose to protect himself. They stood in silence for a while, city stretching endlessly before them. Roman's hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing against hers where they rested on the railing. The touch was light, fleeting, yet it sent a spark racing through her veins. She did not pull away, and when she finally turned her hand slightly, so their fingers touched fully, Roman's breath caught in his throat. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried more weight than any deal he had ever signed. Asterisk when they returned to the ballroom. The evening continued with renewed intensity, but something had shifted between them. Roman found himself more attentive, his hand lingering at the curve of her back as though anchoring her to him. Celeste carried herself with even greater confidence, her laughter ringing like music in his ears. The gala was no longer an obligation for Roman. It had become something entirely unexpected, a revelation. An awakening by the time the night drew to its close and the last guests departed. Roman could not shake the sense that he was standing at the threshold of something he had never allowed himself to imagine. Escorting Celeste to the waiting car, he opened the door for her with an uncharacteristic gentleness. As she settled into the seat, her gown shimmering under the streetlights, he paused, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe as he looked at her one last time. "You were extraordinary tonight," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Celeste's heart swelled at the words, her cheeks warming as she met his gaze. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, though her eyes held a softness that betrayed the growing emotions she no longer wished to hide. Roman closed the door, carefully, and circled to the other side, his mind churning with thoughts he could not yet name. For a man who had built his life on logic and control, this was dangerous territory. And yet, as the car pulled away into the night, with Celeste seated beside him, her presence filling the space with quiet strength and grace, he realized something with startling clarity. This woman had already changed him. Asterisk. The revelation of worth and the new beginning. Night after the gala lingered in Roman's mind like an echo that refused to fade, even as he sat in his office the following morning, surrounded by towering stacks of reports and the endless hum of business demands. His thoughts drifted again and again to the way Celeste had looked under the golden chandeliers, the way her laughter had softened his rigid composure, the way her quiet presence had somehow altered the rhythm of his carefully controlled world. He had always believed that his empire, his reputation, and his relentless pursuit of success were the things that defined him. Yet one evening had shown him how much he had overlooked, not just in Celeste, but in life itself. Celeste, on the other hand, woke with a feeling she could scarcely describe. For years she had lived behind shadows, convinced that invisibility was safety, that being unnoticed was easier than risking rejection or ridicule. But now she had stood among the city's most powerful. She had spoken with confidence. She had danced with a man who once never truly saw her. And she had realized that she was no longer afraid of being seen. The gown, the salon, the glittering ballroom, those things had only revealed what was already there. Her strength, her intelligence, her quiet grace had always existed. What had changed was her willingness to let the world witness them. When she entered the office that morning, wearing not the blue gown but a modest yet carefully chosen dress that still reflected her newfound confidence, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. Colleagues who had passed her daily without notice now paused, their eyes widening, their greetings carrying a new tone of respect. She moved gracefully through the halls, but this time she did not shrink under the stares. She held her head high, her steps measured, her heart steady. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. Roman looked up as she stepped into his office, and though his face remained controlled, something flickered in his eyes. He watched her cross the room, the morning light brushing across her features, and he wondered how he had failed to see this woman for so long. She set his coffee on the desk as always, but there was a quiet assurance in her movements that had not been there before. "Your schedule for today, Mr. Castellano?" she said softly, her voice steady but carrying a faint warmth that drew him in. He studied her for a long moment before replying. "Thank you, Celeste." He said her name with deliberate weight, as though acknowledging her fully for the first time. She met his gaze, and the silence that followed was rich with unspoken meaning. As the days passed, something undeniable grew between them. Roman found excuses to linger in conversation, to ask for her opinion on matters he had once dismissed as his alone to decide. Celeste, no longer hesitant, began to share her thoughts more openly, and to his surprise, he discovered wisdom in her perspective, a clarity that complemented his own. Their dynamic shifted, not with grand declarations, but with subtle gestures, a shared glance during a tense meeting, a quiet word of encouragement when pressure mounted, the faintest brush of fingers when papers were exchanged. But it was not until a week later, when they attended another evening engagement, a smaller, more intimate dinner with potential investors, that Roman fully realized how deeply she had changed not only herself, but him as well. At the table, surrounded by polished executives, Celeste spoke with calm authority about the company's philanthropic initiatives. She did not merely echo facts. She spoke with passion, with heart, and with a sincerity that no carefully rehearsed presentation could match. The investors leaned in, captivated, their respect evident. Roman watched her, pride swelling within him. And for the first time he felt that his empire was stronger not because of his own power, but because of the people he chose to trust, because of her. After the dinner, as they walked together through the quiet streets back to the waiting car, Roman stopped suddenly under the glow of a street lamp. The night air was cool, carrying the distant hum of the city. But in that stillness, all he could hear was the steady rhythm of his own heart. "Celeste," he said, his voice low, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology." She tilted her head, confusion softening her features. "For what, sir?" "For not seeing you," he admitted, his eyes locking with hers. "For years you've been by my side, holding my world together, and I was blind to it. I saw efficiency, competence, reliability, but I never saw you. Not the woman, not the brilliance, not the strength. And then at the gala, you showed me what I had ignored. It wasn't your transformation that stunned MIT, was the truth of who you are." Revealed at last, Celeste's breath caught in her throat, tears stinging her eyes though she tried to hold them back. She had longed to be seen, but never had she imagined such words from him. "Roman," she whispered, no longer calling him sir, her voice trembling with honesty. "I was hiding. I thought it was safer that way. I didn't want the world to see me, because I didn't believe I deserved to be seen." He reached out, gently taking her hand in his thumb brushing across her knuckles with tenderness. "You deserve more than to be seen, Celeste. You deserve to be honored, respected, cherished." His voice faltered slightly on the last word, but the truth in it was undeniable. The moment stretched, their eyes locked. And for the first time, there were no barriers, no shadows, no masks. Celeste felt the weight of years lifting from her shoulders, replaced by a quiet strength that came not from the gown or the salon, but from within her very soul. She smiled, radiant and unafraid. And in that smile, Roman found something he had not realized he had been searching for all his life: peace, belonging, and a love born not of appearances, but of truth. From that day forward, Celeste was no longer the invisible secretary, and Roman was no longer the untouchable millionaire. They walked side by side, partners not only in business but in life, their bond forged through respect, trust, and a shared journey of discovery. The world continued to whisper and speculate, but neither of them cared. They had found in each other something far more valuable than wealth or power, though: courage to be seen and the strength to truly see. And so their story became not just a tale of transformation, but a message. For anyone who had ever hidden themselves away, afraid of the light, true worth, true beauty, true strength was never about gowns or gala nights. It was about stepping out of the shadows, about embracing one's own value, about allowing the world to witness the brilliance that had always been there.